Hello.
Our story begins with a rumbling stomach. Ahsoka Tano was free from the Jedi Order, continuing her life in the Coruscant Underworld. As a youngling and Padawan, she wondered what it was like for people to live down here, if it was at all possible for them to do. Now she understood their torment. It was difficult living in a city without sunlight. That alone was taxing on the individual's body, let alone actually being stuck in the Undercity without a means of getting out. The Underworld, the one without sunlight, was an inescapable pit. If the financial burden of calling the galactic capital home wasn't enough to keep someone suffering, then it was the emotional agony of this way of life. It was everyone for themselves, regardless of how old or young they were. Ahsoka, being from the temple, was used to community. She knew she could confide in her worst enemy or her closest friend. Unfortunately for her, both of those were the same person, and Barriss forced her out of the Jedi Order. Ahsoka's life in the Underworld was relatively smooth sailing. She'd move in between jobs, just trying to find some means to accumulate credits so she could eat, but she was growing tired of that back and forth. All of her Jedi skills went to waste, and quite frankly, it sucked having to consistently look for new work as a mechanic. Most garages didn't want to spare extra credits to a 17-year-old. She might have been skilled, but she didn't fit the mold of what most garage owners wanted. It was unfortunate for both parties, but it was very much so based on judging a book by its cover. Because she couldn't find stability in mechanical work, she started looking elsewhere. Ahsoka was approached by gangs all the time. People wanted new members for their continuous unending turf wars. The gangs of the Underworld just wanted more cannon fodder for a useless test of brawn. The worst part is these turf wars really changed little for the people in the Underworld. They just watched their neighbors die, and that's it. The kid that had a chance of making it out of this part of town might get killed in a convoy bombing. It was all bad for everyone, but the government wasn't helping. Their neglect, their decision to constantly cut funding, led to this, and it only made Ahsoka resent the Republic more and loathe the Jedi for following it and allowing it. Regardless, it's what brought her into this cantina today, the food. She had enough for some soup and maybe a couple crackers, which would last her. The ingredients of the meal weren't the important part, it's who sat down next to her. One of the local mob bosses was looking for his daughter. She'd been abducted by a gang of outsiders, and he was willing to pay anyone whatever he had to get her back. He was speaking to a bounty hunter he hired that fell short at the job. The person he hired lost their leg and called to inform the mob boss inside the cantina that he could no longer complete the mission. Ahsoka, seeing no reason to not offer her assistance, suggested to the mob boss that she'd be willing to do it. This wasn't the most morally sound mission in the galaxy. She was saving the daughter of a Coruscant mob boss, but it would put credits into her pockets, and perhaps give her a place to put her head for a couple nights. She was willing to do it because sometimes it's about being at the right place and the right time. She learned that down here. Even without blasters or lightsaber, she was beyond capable. The mob boss was currently trying not to drown himself in his own supply over his worry, and he accepted Ahsoka's suggestion. He didn't have the credits to afford a top-of-the-line bounty hunter and figured that because of Ahsoka's age, that he'd be able to swindle someone with little experience. She played the game for now, knowing that when she saved the daughter, she could make herself even more credits by swindling back. The mission itself wasn't nearly as hard as even she thought it would be. It was easy work, compared to what she was used to during the Clone War. She snuck into a small building with a ventilation shaft, like she did at the Citadel. Without her saber, she used her hand-to-hand training inside the temple to disarm all of her opponents. She really didn't need her lightsabers either. These underground thugs were just untrained mercenaries, trying to make a living. It made her feel worse about the world she currently lived in, but she did save the mob boss's daughter without killing a single person. Before leaving with the young woman, she also found information that she'd be able to use to barter for more credits. It might be able to get the mob boss more credits while avoiding more damage and death in the Undercity. Essentially a win-win, because basically it was a drive that led to a mob bank. None of it was her business in reality, she was just trying to make more credits for her. And unfortunately, it came at the cost of selling her morals short just a little bit. But all of those credits couldn't put her appetite away, because what she ate all came back out after she sat and lived with her actions. Ahsoka tried to convince herself that the mob boss wouldn't do anything with the drive information, but of course, he wouldn't. People would die, it would prolong the turf war, and it was too late to change anything. Even though the mob boss wanted his daughter back, the drive was all the information he needed to make a strike at a mob bank, and make not just all of the credits back that he just paid to Ahsoka, but nearly 3 times more than he already had in his account. It was a huge victory for him and his gang, and Ahsoka arrived after he ran off. There were 14 dead, a hole in the building, and raging fires that started to burn up the nearby apartments. Luckily, no one in those homes would be killed or injured, but they would have to relocate. And it just broke Ahsoka. She felt terrible. She wanted to rip her montrals off in frustration. Barely 17, and this felt like an immature mistake. But she was still so young, and the Jedi had deprived her of the youth that she should be able to enjoy. Ahsoka was stuck in a mindset of a clone commander, someone who fought and watched her brothers die every day for almost 3 years. That was life-changing trauma, and she couldn't come to the rationalization that she needed help in a different way. She was so hard on herself, especially now, because every Jedi hid their emotions, and she believed that she needed to be just like that, even if she wasn't a Jedi anymore. That's how she was raised. She had to grapple with her new series of mistakes here in the underworld, while also trying to save enough money to live comfortably, or at all. Despite the actual work of a bounty hunter being vicious and cold, Ahsoka found missions that didn't force her to surrender her values. Just having a small home to call her own was the life-changing factor that she didn't realize she needed. It was a choice between a small vehicle or an apartment in the lower levels of the city, but still could see a bit of the skyline. Ahsoka knew how to get around without wasting credits, and while using proper personal transportation would be useful for doing missions, she knew an apartment would do her better personally. If she was going to be making credits, then she might as well have a home to rest her head on. She found that, especially on her own, that it was always the little things that got her by on hard days. When she was homeless, she'd always wish for a pillow or a bed to permanently call her own. Now that she finally had it, she couldn't leave it. Her new little home allowed her to stay on Coruscant and not search for side quests off-world. Maybe she had grown too attached, just days after having it, but even during the war, she longed for a place to rest. In many ways, it reminded her of sieges in the trenches, or long drawn-out battles where the only thing she had to call her own were her Jedi robes. This pillow was like sinking back into her bed inside Yularen's flagship, or her chambers inside the temple. It was everything. As a result, she never found her way to Obadiah or into the grips of Bo-Katan. She did whatever little work she could find with the local mob, and returned to her humble home. It was much better for her, and it didn't force her to solve problems Mandalore created for themselves. They weren't deserving of a Republic invasion, because their problems were created from nothing. Their Duchess fixed everything wrong with Mandalore, and they killed her. Ahsoka was far better off worrying about her own problems anyways. The Mandalorians destroyed their peace. They could try and fix it themselves. Ahsoka made a name for herself by keeping her nose out of bad business, and doing jobs that many would consider too soft. Not that these were easy jobs, but to those born and raised in the underworld, they were looked at as quote-unquote cop jobs. Too morally good and low-paying for most people to see them as viable options. For someone like Ahsoka, who didn't care about her street rep, it was the perfect job. It kept her out of the sight of the preoccupied Jedi Order, and a very low price on her own head, which didn't even exist. Yet that would all change when she entered her frequent black market. With the Clone Wars coming to an end, she entered a market for new chargers for her personal taser. It was a weapon she used seldomly to protect herself when her sneak attack didn't work on larger grunts. What she found inside the black market, though, brought her all the way back to her time as a Jedi. As a quote-unquote light bounty hunter, she'd forgotten about the Order, but this sight changed all of it for her. She looked down at a lightsaber, one collected by the market dealers in some sort of terrible transaction. Ahsoka could certifiably say that she looked back at her time in the Order with great disfavor, especially the end of it, but those Jedi values remained inside her heart. She could take the code and throw it out. She could see the Council and forget them. But who she was because of the Jedi, she could never remove that. Ahsoka developed strong morals thanks to her time inside the Order, and seeing someone selling a dead Jedi's weapon filled her body with fury. She knew and understood how one soul connected to their kyber crystal, and how someone buying up the saber would be disrespecting that Jedi's life. So, with the Force, she pulled the weapon to her hand, and the man behind the counter ripped the blaster from behind it. She ignited the saber, and a surprising orange hue lit her face. She didn't have time to examine it, as she reflexively bent the weapon in front of her face, blocking the incoming blaster shot back into the man's throat, killing him instantly. Ahsoka was hit with the reality of her actions. She wasn't inside a shop, she was on the front lines watching separatist rebels pelt clone troopers with blaster fire, and Rex, Jesse, and even Hardcase were gunning them down. Ahsoka quickly blinked away her memories, and crushed the cameras inside the market with the Force. She was attacked, and instead of being able to avoid more death, she caused it with the right deflections. Not a soul would know who was responsible for this perfect strike on the black market. Every single individual killed inside of it had only one blaster wound. There was no other damage to the area aside from the cameras. And to those who found the murders, they didn't see anything notable stolen, because most buyers inside the shop weren't there to buy lightsabers. It was too pricey for anyone who frequented. Ahsoka worried about what she did, but she morally felt like it was the right decision. A Jedi's weapon shouldn't be desecrated by the scum of the underworld. It belonged to someone. It was that someone's very soul. She rushed the weapon and herself back to her tiny home and let it to rest inside some cloth she had remaining from her time as a Jedi. She gently wrapped it, and with that, meditated with the saber, hoping to bring its old user to peace. Ahsoka didn't know how to heal a lightsaber yet. That was beyond her own capabilities at this point, but she knew how to quell the darkness. She would bring silence to the heart of the kyber crystal, and also simply, she began her process. Ahsoka's eyes opened nearly a week later, when sirens rang through the city. An explosion detonated above in the sky and woke her from a meditation. The crystal inside the saber felt warm to the touch, as if it had been healed, as if the soul who was once tied to it finally found their eternal rest. She put the cloth down and rushed to the tiny window in her apartment to look out into the night sky. All Ahsoka could see was smoke billowing out of a building nearby, but she didn't know which one. Thanks to her meditation, she was able to avoid the chaos of the Siege of Coruscant, but even though this event was less extreme in size, it still held personal weight. It's why it woke her. She felt the rumble of the explosion, but there was something else. There was something specific that woke her up. The screams, the terror, the pain, the betrayal. Something was eerily wrong. From her window she could barely see much, so she trekked to the top of her apartment complex to gaze upon, from across the city, the burning up Jedi Temple. The smoke and fire seemed far larger than it was when the detonation first happened, and she couldn't believe her eyes. Was there the want to do something about it? Absolutely. But this was no longer her duty. She couldn't return to the Jedi Temple. Next to her, someone with viewfinders stood in shock. She wanted to look through them. She wanted to know what happened, but she decided it wasn't worth it. Whatever fate befell the Jedi had to have been coming. Instead of reacting or acting, she closed her eyes. Her meditation kept her in a very low energy state, so focusing on the Force was her safest option. What Ahsoka was searching for was her former master. Was Anakin okay? Was Plo or Obi-Wan okay? She just wanted to make sure they were safe. If they were, then maybe she could just ignore this. Maybe it felt wrong, but she was no longer a Jedi. She didn't associate herself with their order. The only reason she took the lightsaber was to respect the soul of the individual who died. It's why the saber never returned to the temple after she got it from the black market. As she felt through the Force, she could only sense pain, agony, and destruction. Again, that call to go to the temple came, but with a new swarm of LAATs rushing towards the structure, she decided it wasn't worth her time. Ahsoka could never fathom the clones betraying the Jedi, so she simply suspected that these were reinforcements. She didn't sense any of the three of her masters here anyways. All of them were probably off competing for victory in the Outer Rim sieges, so why would they be here? As she turned back to her home, she thought she could feel a flicker of Anakin Skywalker, but she passed it off as if it were a miscommunication from the Force. The only reason she never sensed her master fully was because Lord Vader was destroying the Jedi in their own home. Anakin was dying, and Vader was born. It wouldn't be until the following morning that Ahsoka would realize her great mistake by being complacent. The Jedi were blacklisted as traitors against the Republic. Master Windu was accused of trying to assassinate the Chancellor, and in one final stroke, Palpatine would create the Galactic Empire and name himself Emperor. Despite her grievances with the Master of the Order, not even she believed that propaganda about Windu. Ahsoka would choose the middle of the following night, during the actual official rise of the Empire, to sneak into the Jedi Temple. She just needed to see if Anakin survived the Purge. As she went through, avoiding the rows of dead Jedi and the clones of the 501st watching over them, she discovered the security recordings. What she saw broke her heart twice. Not only did Anakin betray the Jedi and slaughter them, in a pledge to his new master Darth Sidious, but Yoda and Obi-Wan were forced to slaughter her brothers inside the 501st. She could literally tell which clones of her unit Kenobi or Yoda killed across the temple. Her brothers, though, were traitorous murderers, and her two masters had to kill them. But as would be reported, despite what she saw, Masters Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Skywalker were all reported as dead. She left the temple with hope, believing that based on what she saw that her closest friends survived the Purge, that being Anakin and Obi-Wan, despite what she saw Anakin doing. But she couldn't confirm her suspicions nor really digest what she saw, until of course the rollout of Imperial propaganda came. The reports that released 2 weeks after the attack on the temple would make Ahsoka physically ill. A recording of Plo Koon's quote-unquote attack on an orphanage on Cato Nemodia. His ship wasn't shot down. Instead, after his clones demanded a surrender, he kamikazed into a building filled with innocent children. Instead of a dead Master Kenobi, he was reported as missing this time. Yet the case for her own master was equally as confusing. No longer was Anakin Skywalker the apprentice of Lord Sidious. No longer was he the traitor that murdered the younglings. He was reported as a Jedi who protected the Supreme Chancellor from the Jedi. Wait, what? He died trying to save the soul of the Republic, which to many, he had. His position in Republic propaganda, now depicted in Imperial propaganda, showed a Clone War hero dying with the last little bit of dignity the Jedi Order had. None of it was believable, and for the first time, she saw the Republic media machine turn against its citizens. Maybe it had been done throughout the war, but now Ahsoka was actually aware of it. Because Ahsoka remained a bounty hunter, her life didn't directly change following the destruction of the Jedi. Lord Sidious didn't start caring about her because, truthfully, he forgot she existed. Skywalker, now Vader, clearly didn't care. He never mentioned her prior to turning. After becoming Sidious's apprentice, Vader didn't say anything about trying to find Ahsoka, so Palpatine neglected her existence because why would he remember it? This allowed her to remain a shadow in the underworld, but no longer could she try and use the Jedi weapon in her missions. Ahsoka picked up her own blaster and kept that by her side, due to Imperial patrols in the Undercity ramping up. She didn't want to get caught flat-footed by well-trained Coruscant shock troopers, who currently searched for survivors of the Purge. Despite Ahsoka's own instincts, she never found a Jedi seeking refuge. They were simply here one day and gone by the following sunrise. It was terrifying, and the fact that no one cared worried her even more. She had her grievances with the Jedi, believing that everyone else reasonably had them too. But if the government could just wipe an entire group of people off the map without opposition, then was anyone really safe? That was a real question. Sure, she and the other citizens inside the underworld were safe today, but that no longer seemed like a guarantee tomorrow. It was such a frightening concept to try and grasp, but Ahsoka, like everyone else, couldn't focus on it. She had to get back to the monotony of everyday life. Girls gotta eat, and the Jedi weren't putting food on her table anymore. That everyday system of life was a weapon that the Emperor utilized to make the disappearance of the Jedi even less noticeable. And unfortunately for the Old Order, it worked. because if people were working their own jobs, they weren't looking, nor were they thinking about the implications of the erasure of the Jedi. Ahsoka, though, was a unique case. No longer did she consider working for the good, easy jobs of choice. She had questions about the disappearance of Anakin Skywalker and/or his betrayal of the Jedi. She saw what she saw inside the temple. She could see the recordings of her former master betraying her peers, and then the Empire released a statement about protecting the Chancellor and dying there. That specific wording there, about a Chancellor, cued her to a lie that had to be happening behind the scenes. So under the pseudonym of Morai, she found herself work for the Empire. Obviously, Ahsoka covered up some of her markings and wore extravagant makeup and armor to hide her identity, so that to the Imperial clone troopers, she was unrecognizable. Truthfully, working for the Empire was a life-changing endeavor for Ahsoka. They were paying bounty hunters to do smaller yet important jobs on behalf of the Emperor and Empire, plus they paid much better than the mob bosses in the underworld. Ahsoka obviously concerned herself with the ethics of it, but she wanted to know what happened to her master. The dark side clouded everything, and she refused to just accept that Anakin turned against the Jedi in the way she saw it. Obi-Wan may have been able to defeat his former apprentice, but Ahsoka couldn't fathom that either. Regardless, Ahsoka's first jobs weren't the high-paying jobs that she hoped to get. Morai had absolutely no street cred, and the Empire was employing her as cannon fodder, literally. She went with a batch of quote-unquote bounty hunters to Old Republic territory to snuff out rebels who didn't cooperate with the Empire's new law. According to Imperial moffs and governors, militiamen and women of the Republic worlds needed to surrender their weapons. If they didn't, if they were even seen with a weapon, then they would be fired upon by clone operatives in local towns and cities. The Empire didn't need anyone running around believing that they were still at war with the Separatists. Self-protection was actually uprising against the Empire, and an unarmed population was far less threatening than one with wartime veterans. Saw Gerrera was obviously a top-tier example of an armed civilian, but he was one of thousands. These little bounty hunter squads were basically sent to kill off the rebels, and those who survived would be employed elsewhere. Palpatine didn't need to waste the clones on rebels. They were far better off with larger, more important targets. Again, most of these little rebels weren't as talented as Gerrera. They simply won because of Republic aid. So she and dozens of other wannabe bounty hunters went into a forest and pretty much died. Of course, Ahsoka didn't. She was a veteran, and she had experience training these guerrilla-type fighters. This didn't mean she killed them either, though. Thanks to her time as a Jedi, and her understanding of late War Republic protocol, she was not only able to buy time for these rebels to escape, but also provide the Empire with proof that she was technically successful. Not to say the Empire paid her well, because she only got paid her cut, not that of everyone else who died, but they saw the bounty hunter Morai as a useful asset, someone who was beyond talented with a blaster, very capable, and very cheap. The Empire could pay Cad Bane, but he came at a premium because of his reputation. Morai had none, and she just put up a singular Cad Bane-like performance, so they kept paying her cheap, and sent her to do more important work, even providing her a piece of junk freighter to use, because she didn't have her own transport. It was a retired vessel, so to the Empire, it was nothing, but it just went to show how interested they were in using bounty hunters to do their dirty work. Ahsoka's work didn't really bring her answers. It brought her credits and appreciation from the Empire, but it sucked. It was so soulless, and she hated it with all of her being. She truthfully couldn't get over the fact that this was what she was forced to do for answers, that it was all she could do. Though as she developed more of a reputation in the early weeks of employment, the Empire slowly started to hand out better paying jobs to her, opportunities to do some things that reputable bounty hunters might avoid. These were classified missions. They came with a diagnosis of her entire history, meaning that Ahsoka had to use another Togrutan's blood, someone who died during one of her missions, and craft a tragic backstory that matched her Jedi life without exposing who she really was. The Empire wasn't going to send just anybody on these missions, but basically her backstory became, instead of being brought to the temple, she was abducted from a young age and taught to bounty hunt on Coruscant and Corellia. Regardless, it was enough of a cover for her to get by with, and it's when she started to question everything. Not only did she accidentally interact with an inquisitor inside of a Venator, but she was tasked with abducting children of the Force. At first, she accepted the mission, but by the time she was about to deliver the child, she backed out. She couldn't do it, and with a child inside of a little infant pod and an inquisitor across from her, she was forced to fight for life and death. Ahsoka's now blue lightsaber ignited, and she defended herself from an unsuspecting inquisitor. One of the fools who didn't assume anything of her aside from thinking she was a regular Jedi Padawan. Well, technically she was, but just not anyone's student. Within 4 or 5 parries, the Inquisitor was cut in half, and Ahsoka was forced to block blaster bolts back into the attacking clones, before quickly escaping and jumping into hyperspace. Not only was Ahsoka Tano a potential target for clones, but now her ulterior personality Morai was. But she was gone again, and forced to figure out what the Emperor wanted with these children. Ahsoka obviously recalled her early in the war mission to Mustafar, where the Sith were abducting children of the Force. But again, why? That was a terrifying question, with a likely even more frightening answer on the other side of it. Ahsoka handled this revelation with a retaliation of equal force. In her short stint working for the Empire, she learned how to keep an eye on their bounty hunting operations, a feat that directly led her into the arms of a former best friend, one who both saved her life, but also caused her some of the greatest emotional turmoil she faced in her life. When rescuing another child from a different bounty hunter, she crossed paths with a Jedi on the run from the Inquisitors by happenstance. Seeing the age of the former Padawan, Ahsoka knew he wouldn't survive, and gave them the infant, promising the individual freedom with the winds, as long as he kept searching for a real home. Her message was to take her hope and spread it, because the Empire's grips were as fragile as their belief that they had control. She in turn faced Fourth Sister and her companion. They were once Jedi, known as Lin and Barriss. One would fight to the death, the other wouldn't have the strength to lift her blade. Just seeing that Ahsoka survived the Purge brought warmth to Barriss's heart. She knew that her friend was forced from the Order, and she felt terrible for it ever since she went to prison, knowing how much Ahsoka loved being a Jedi. Now was Barriss's chance to make things right. During the engagement between Fourth Sister and Ahsoka, Barriss tried to discourage the sister from prolonging the fight, but it was pointless. Lin died within a minute of their duel beginning. Ahsoka didn't raise her saber to Barriss. She didn't try and fight her, and they could barely even exchange looks, let alone words. They were best friends, survivors of Geonosis, and Barriss betrayed that friendship. All she could really do was praise Ahsoka, and instead of accepting said praise, Ahsoka thanked Barriss for inadvertently saving her life. It was a little conversation lifter, something that made them both smile and ease into an actual discussion, one where Barriss would choose to abandon the Inquisitors and join Ahsoka. But there was one unfortunate truth that Barriss had. Even after their reminiscing, their stories, their realities, there remained one thing that Barriss knew. She sensed it when she first became an Inquisitor to survive, and she told Ahsoka that her master was no longer a man. He existed somewhere inside of a metal husk. Barriss could sense the presence of Anakin Skywalker, but it wasn't him. It brought Ahsoka back to the night of the Purge. Barriss described the exact same feeling Ahsoka felt that night. It was a tiny passing wind that felt like Anakin, but no one could really tell who it was. He was somewhere inside this cloud of darkness. Barriss believed that the Anakin they knew no longer existed, and with that, told her to learn to let go of her former master. The reign of the Empire really muddled time. To the people living under its occupation, it felt like time flew by. It was a continuous series of unprecedented events backed by equally as convoluted rationale for their existence, and then a silent return to nothing, as if anything didn't happen. Ahsoka and Barriss were fighting the good fight, and it felt like progress was being made, but it just made time speed by for them. They were saving infants of the Force and Purge survivors, but they weren't making a real dent in the Empire. The only real damage they did was kill off a load of inquisitors. It was to a point that even individuals like Trilla or Ninth Sister or Eighth Brother never ended up joining the cause. Their members were dying and only Grand Inquisitor remained. Thanks to this, there were more Purge survivors with Quinlan Vos on the path, but it also meant Lord Vader was hunting them down himself. Luckily, there was this little dream team, and it had a third member, someone that Barriss and Ahsoka accidentally picked up following her training seminar for Omega on Baboon. Yes, the Daylight Joy herself, Asajj Ventress, was a member of this trio. She didn't join willingly, kinda. She did, but she wouldn't admit to doing so, because she really didn't want to be a member of a Jedi Resistance. Alas, Ahsoka and Barriss weren't Jedi, so it was a fair deal. No Jedi nonsense about ethics, just fighting the Empire. It was a worthwhile cause, but Ventress wasn't nearly as invested as they were. She was just happy to kill off Inquisitors and save infants. Her whole society being destroyed by Sidious kept a small portion of Ventress's heart available for the innocent. It was still a tough sell for Asajj, but she was a member of the squad, a small found family. Neutral light, neutral dark, and plain old neutral. It was a nice combination. Ahsoka representative of the light, Asajj of the dark, and Barriss was the healer in the middle, the one who continued to exercise her knowledge on Force healing so she could best help those around her. Thanks to their efforts to knock off Imperials and Inquisitors alike, there were a number of people around the galaxy, and even on Coruscant, that supported them. These were literal thugs, bums, pirates, and gangsters that built trust for these three women. They were heroes of the underworld, silent but lethal attackers that even the most elite Imperials feared going up against. Sidious wouldn't even send Grand Inquisitor after them because he believed that his agent wouldn't last a minute. So Vader was their #1 hunter. It was smooth for the trio for the past year or so. Since everyone joined, they were able to avoid the Dark Lord, but he caught up to them on a false flag operation designed by him to draw them out, which worked perfectly. When they arrived at the location of the distress call, he was waiting, in complete darkness. Vader was not going to show compassion to Asajj or Offee, but he also didn't know how he would handle Ahsoka. This was still a Vader that only had 2 full years inside the suit, someone who had matured as a Sith, but hadn't evolved into a convinced loyalist of their ways. He worried for what kind of memories fighting his apprentice could bring up for him. The Emperor would surely have him destroyed if he even considered betraying the Empire, let alone maybe bringing her in. No words were shared when he revealed himself. All he did was ignite his lightsaber and exit from the darkness. The 3 warriors prepared the defenses and spread out. Vader paced between them. Having defeated the Jedi in large groups before, he knew what to expect from them. But this was a trio that had time to prepare. Barriss as an Inquisitor never saw him in action, but each of these 3 individuals had fought with Skywalker in one way or another. The trio with the Force ripped the floor up around him and pelted him with tiles. He protected himself and swung into the chaos. Each of them ducked out of the way, except for Ahsoka, who spun into his attack. Their sabers collided and Asajj leapt through the air. Vader beat down on his former apprentice, before backhanding his saber towards the former assassin. He parried and rolled his hand around to rip down onto Barriss as well. Ahsoka moved in to save her friend, kicking Vader's legs, which did absolutely no damage, and then jabbed at him. But a sly saber move deflected her strike away, sending her stumbling. Ventress had her back, smashing her weapon into Vader's incoming counter. He was able to hold his own, but she pressed him back, giving Barriss enough time to rise behind him. He pulled his saber upright, sending Ventress into the ceiling, and threw it back to counter Offee. He was a reckless and aggressive fighter, and that was both to their detriment and their advantage. Vader had time inside his suit and was familiar with it, but he was also impossibly difficult to defend against. Every strike was like tanking the brunt force of a light cruiser. He didn't mess around with his swings, and it was felt by each of these opponents. So they countered, logically, by allowing him to overstep, and gaining an upper hand by playing to their strengths, rather than his. This slight adjustment allowed the smaller, more maneuverable trio to land hits on his armor, while keeping him away from knocking any single one of them off balance. But it came with a problem. Because he was getting hit, he was growing more and more irritated each time his armor flashed with yellow sparks. Ventress and Barriss, using a formation they used against a duo of inquisitors, split Vader down the middle, rushing off to either side of him, as Ahsoka charged up the middle behind him. He, using the very little flexibility he had, turned around, facing his back towards Ahsoka again as she jumped over him and ducked. His arms then outstretched and he launched Asajj and Barriss through the air and into the wall. Ahsoka, who was already mid-jump, flew over her former master and rolled across the surface on the other side of him. When she looked up, he was standing as if he hadn't moved, his hands outstretched, and he offered her a chance to join him on the dark side. But the now 19-year-old former Jedi couldn't reasonably look at him. She asked if he really thought that after everything he had done that she would join him. She saw what he did inside the temple. She knew from that point on that her master, that the Anakin Skywalker that Rex, Obi-Wan, and Padme all loved, no longer existed. The person she trusted died in service of something that tried to destroy everything Anakin said he loved. The disgust and anguish in her voice was heartbreaking, and instead of giving Skywalker the chance for redemption, she charged him. Vader staggered, but raised his saber and saw his opportunity. Without Barriss or Ventress, this was an easy victory. He trained Ahsoka, he knew her every move, and he readily moved into the right position. Just as their instruction had gone again and again, she made the exact same strike she knew would work against Skywalker, just not Vader. And just as he prepared to strike her down after the perfect counter, he extinguished his lightsaber. Ahsoka was milliseconds away from death, and instead, her lightsaber passed through where his should have been and slashed right through his chest. Both he and she, in that moment, knew that he chose her over him. With the right deflection, she would have been killed by Vader, and instead, Darth Vader fell to his knees and dropped his hands beneath him. His respirator started to wheeze uncontrollably, and Ahsoka stepped back, not knowing what to say. But she didn't need to say the words. Anakin, somewhere deep inside the wounded suit, crawled out to the surface of the body. He spoke shakily through his mask, and it slowly but audibly trickled into Ahsoka's head. She heard the words, but hardly registered them. She watched Vader's body fall to the ground lifelessly, and it was then when she heard Anakin's final words, those being a painfully desperate, "Forgive me." Asajj and Barriss both saw everything Ahsoka felt, and Anakin's final words were repeated inside her head until it pushed Ahsoka to tears. Even the cold Ventress was willing to console her friend, because she knew what it felt like to be betrayed by a master. All of them felt Ahsoka's pain, and with her, they left Darth Vader to be burnt by the fire they started. In Ahsoka's own words, it was her way of letting Anakin be forgiven, by returning him to the netherworld of the Force, the same way Qui-Gon Jinn did, by way of the fire. Defeating Darth Vader wouldn't change the Empire for the better, each of them knew that, so they started to consider alternatives to fixing the galaxy. It was in fighting Vader that they realized that perhaps their fight was too small. None of them had anything else aside from each other, and Ventress proposed something. It was the dark magic of the Great Mother. Asajj believed it could be the right curse to bring Sidious down and destroy him. But they, of course, needed to go to Dathomir to see if they could find the right spell. The trio understood that Sidious was an unstoppable force. Killing Vader, despite Skywalker's redemption, didn't change the fate of the galaxy. Palpatine would continue to evolve and search for newer, more capable apprentices. There was no reason for them to continue hunting off his extensions, when the key to saving the universe was sat on the throne of Coruscant. Asajj never openly suggested using this method for two reasons. The first of which being that she theorized that the actual spell was burned in the destruction of her home. The second, she refused to tell her friends. Neither of them thought anything of it, and truthfully assumed that they would have to use the dark side to use Dathomir magic, which was a price they were all willing to pay for the salvation of the galaxy. They simply, after spending a year plus with Ventress, knew that she could be a little skittish when referencing the dark side to her friends. It wasn't them, it was her. Regardless, while they were searching for ancient spells, Sidious was furious. His student was destroyed, and his assumption was Grandmaster Yoda. Of course, the trap was set for the trio of former Jedi and a witch, but he believed Yoda was behind their rapid development. The Empire, as a result, upped its patrols, crackdowns, and martial law to draw the Jedi out, but there was no Yoda nor Obi-Wan. The real threats he should be worried about were in transit from Dathomir to Coruscant. They found the spell, and Asajj crafted and/or located some more relics to assist him with their mission. She believed it would work, but she still had her concerns about it. When they returned to their home base inside the galactic capital, Ahsoka and Barriss informed their allies, all of which being the long-ago aforementioned mob bosses, thugs, and pirates, that they might need protection. If that ends up being the case, they would need manpower capable of taking out TK troopers and clones. The thugs were ready, and they believed they were capable. By the time Ahsoka and Barriss got back to their home after telling their allies, Asajj's ritual was ready. Before they could begin though, Ventress pointed one of the mob bosses to a datapad in the corner of the room. It had information they planned to release about the Empire after the death of the Emperor, and he was perfectly cool with obtaining it in case the troopers bursted through the doors and forced them out. Asajj began their seance. They knelt down in a circle and followed Ventress's footsteps, as she walked them through, first, the meditation, and secondly, the curse. Mother Talzin, long before Ventress's birth, crafted up a spell to keep the Sith away from her clan, on the off chance that they attacked. It was a little similar to what they used against Dooku, but in close proximity, i.e. planetary proximity. It would be more effective and wouldn't require an actual doll being made for the individual's physical being. All these three needed to do was harmonize and find Sidious's essence, which realistically shouldn't be a challenge with focus. As Ventress suspected, he'd be like a massive burst of light in a sea of dimness. Sure, Coruscant was overpopulated, with its trillion-plus residents, but not a single soul, not even these three individuals, had the magnitude of essence or sensitivity to the Force that he had. With a simple command, they were able to lock onto him, and the Sith Lord, deep in his own laboratory, like Plagueis before him, was smacked by a corrupting spell. His knees fell out from under him, and he tried to resist the pull, but this spell wasn't one that would kill him off easily. Palpatine and the three Force users were almost on opposite ends of the spectrum. Sidious was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. These three were casting a withering spell against him. It forced him to the ground, but Ventress suspected a 24-hour turnaround, meaning that they would have to really focus heavily on each other and their connection to the Force. But Sidious was just able to dispatch Grand Inquisitor to hunt for their location. The Pa'un former Jedi didn't have the proper training or knowledge of the Force to understand how to save the Emperor, so he went straight to the works in the industrial sector. If he could find and conduct a ritual to locate these quote-unquote witches, as Palpatine called them, perhaps he could save the Empire and become Palpatine's true apprentice. This was everything Grand Inquisitor needed to prove his worth, and unfortunately for him, for the first 12 hours, he would get absolutely nowhere. Asajj, Barriss, and Ahsoka, on the other hand, were suffering, yet they went through this ritual together. The withering of Sheev Palpatine was working. His limbs were becoming dysfunctional, fingers and toes fell off his body, and his face started to droop. He couldn't even communicate fluently. The witches of Dathomir had the right curses to break the Sith, and Mother Talzin was the architect. By the time hour 20 rolled around, Grand Inquisitor started honing in on the location, the whereabouts, just somewhere in the underworld in a specific district, and so he dispatched every single available unit to a location within the vicinity of where he thought the home was. He didn't have the precise location and would continue searching for it, using the little alchemy he knew and was using. But for now, until he found it, the troopers had 4 hours to find the Masters of Wither. At hour 22, TK troopers got a little trigger happy and fired on some locals. This wasn't because they found actual perpetrators, no, of course not. They got a little spooked. And because the TK troopers weren't real soldiers like the clones, they just tried to exude authority. They were scared little men playing a game they didn't want to play in no man's land. Unfortunately, these TK buffoons triggered a skirmish between pirates and stormtroopers. It called more attention to the same few blocks that Ahsoka, Barriss, and Asajj were working on, but the trio stayed focused. They had their mission, and they knew what they needed to do. destroy Palpatine, and also the skirmish was a perfect distraction to keep them safe. The Sith Lord currently was on his deathbed. He couldn't even fight it anymore. He was so weak that he needed constant medical supervision, but even that was barely keeping him alive. Sidious was attempting to essence transfer, but because he was using all of his energy on defending himself from these witches, he couldn't actually put any energy into anything else without dying. He was stuck, relying on Grand Inquisitor, and just with the skirmish kicking off, the Grand Inquisitor located them. Quickly, the Paw-Un Man rushed from the Sith lair in the industrial sector all the way to the Imperial Palace and the districts below it. Just beyond the doors of this trio's home, blaster fire poured through the streets. Arriving clones assumed that this was a battle to stop the Emperor's killers, but no, just for the funnies. It happened to be in a close location because of course it would be, but the pirates stationed to protect the trio that weren't involved in the skirmish decided to join the battle. The extra reinforcements for both sides created a total standstill until Grand Inquisitor arrived. His saber ignited and he cut through the pirates around him, slicing through them and locating the building he was searching for. It was like a pull of the Force. He could almost sense them. Through battle, pirates, thugs, he eventually cut through the door with the protection of clone troopers and stormtroopers, but he was left with disappointment. All three of the individuals were lying lifelessly on the ground. The second thing that Asajj spoke about but never told the truth about came to reality. Ventress knew that the sheer effort to kill Palpatine would take everything all three of them had. She just didn't know if it would kill them or not. That's partially the reason she refused to elaborate. She feared that they would back out if she told the truth. Yet despite her final action being a lie or a half-truth, there was a full truth to look at. The Grand Inquisitor, being late, meant that the Emperor was dead. But it also meant that Asajj Ventress, Barriss Offee, and Ahsoka Tano died as sisters. They may have been enemies each at one point in their lives. They may have endured betrayal and torment, but together, they forged a family, a connection, and together as sisters, they defeated the Sith. Grand Inquisitor never ended up looking or discovering the data pad left behind by the sisters. Instead, one of the surviving pirates got the information out, and it revealed a plethora of sins committed by the Empire, specifically the abduction of children. And while there were people who didn't care because why wouldn't that be a problem, the galaxy was fortunate that there were quadrillions of galactic citizens. They were more than enough to take up a problem with the random abduction of children because hey, that's pretty outrageous. Of course, the datapad had many more crimes committed by the Empire, but that was a huge sympathy pool for the regular everyday citizens of the former Republic. Yet without Palpatine or Vader, the Empire was lost. The Senate could still recuperate its power with enough time and votes, but it was an uphill struggle for the following few years as rebellions grew out of control, with people realizing that no one could be safe in an authoritarian regime. The Senator of Gorman said it best during a speech inside the Senate, that it could be his people today and theirs tomorrow. No one could be safe if true change wasn't brought to the Imperial regime. It'd be arduous too. Grand Inquisitor would vie for power as the last remaining Sith in the galaxy. It failed pretty badly, but he would go down with some very important Imperial officers, and in the long run, accidentally free the government from aspiring autocrats in the military. The struggle for domination and control, and even peace in the Empire, took nearly a full decade to complete, all with the rebellions, both Imperial-bred and locally created, and the need to redesign the Senate around a body of people rather than one man. It was arduous, all of it, but it did result in a better government for the people of the galaxy. Outside the galactic politics, the clones would actually be revered by the Senate at least, because they took the side of the Senate, with promises from several representatives that they'd be protected. The clones delivered, and the Senate, as a result, did the same for them. The TKs and their rambunctious goons were put down like the dogs they were, and forced into cells or worse, while the clones got treatment like the heroes of the Clone Wars should get. As for the Jedi, they'd make their own return, mostly in the Boken form. With so many would-be Inquisitors remaining Jedi, there would actually be a stronger order formed by Quinlan Vos, and while he believed his partner to have died during the Clone War, he'd be the one to discover the sacrifices of Ahsoka, Barriss, and Asajj. Their memory would long be preserved by the Jedi because Quinlan didn't make a new order about just survivors of the Purge. Instead, he created a religion around the religions of the Force. People like Marin found home in this way of life. Same with individuals like Chirrut and other Guardians of the Wills. Quinlan formed a communal Jedi Order, one that not only remembered the sacrifices of what he called their strongest members, but brought together everyone who suffered under the Empire so that they could better the lives of others around the galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Sith Clone Wars coming out this week. Better get freaking hype. Season 4, guys. Saturday. Be there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. A little dark, and this is kind of, I think, a neutral light story. I saw you guys talking about neutral lights. I saw it. I thought doing a neutral light story would be kind of fun. There was an idea I had going into this story of doing like a dream team concept with Ventress, Barriss, and Ahsoka teaming up, and I thought that'd be really fun. And Asajj is a little bit of a hard pull there. She might be a little bit like no, but I kind of think that I think for this story it kind of works. It's just kind of a dream team, honestly. It is kind of just the fun concept of putting those three together as a team. But it was fun putting those three together and then having them fight both Vader and Palpatine in their own ways. I kind of liked this concept of Vader fighting Ahsoka. This is obviously a Vader that there is no Siege of Mandalore, so the last time he saw Ahsoka, she was walking the steps at the temple, right? She was leaving the temple. So he's got that little memory of a much younger Ahsoka, and I think he's gonna just see that before he deignites his lightsaber. I think Anakin's struggle in the story is that he's not fully committed to the Sith, and that Ahsoka is someone he would rather die for than kill. And that's really what his choice bubbles down to in the end, is that he just doesn't see value in killing her. He doesn't see value in living knowing that he did kill her. As for Palpatine and killing him, not gonna lie, there's not really any way Ahsoka, Barriss, and Asajj are winning a straight fight with him. He is just a monster. He just is. It felt like the only way to do it was with something Mother Talzin would do, and that's a withering spell. And I went with Wither because I felt like actually both the sacrifice of Asajj, Barriss, and Ahsoka kind of went hand in hand with killing Palpatine. He's just such a powerful being that I think them using all their power, all of their energy for 24 hours to kill this dude, I think that's kind of a fair time span, but also almost a fair way to do it. I just don't see any way for them to realistically kill him in person and kill him in like the span of an hour. Like Mother Talzin, no problem killing Dooku if she wasn't just messing around with a doll. Like she could have just murdered him. And then instead these three are kind of just working together and kind of working through ventures. And I did kind of like this concept where they do all die. It is a little bit tragic, but I also think that even though they didn't necessarily sign up for it, they would have been okay with it, even if they were told. And that's kind of the tragedy, so you don't technically know how the characters feel about it, despite them going into it with the idea of killing the Emperor. So, hope you enjoyed this neutral light story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.